Hey guys, in this video we're going to be looking at how to do the graphing lab. So when you get onto your D2L page, you can go into content. Then under content, you should be able to find lab component content right here. And then under here, we are looking for lab 3, our graphing lab. And within here, we should be able to find our graphing data, and we're going to download that. After that has downloaded, we will open it up. Enable editing if you need to, and we are going to make a graph out of essentially one of these sets of data as well as this set of data. So I want to point out that we've got age, boys' height and weight, girls' height and weight. We are going to be doing age versus height or weight for either a boy or a girl as our first graph. And we can use either the starting age or the ending age. Don't use both. And then just one of these other variables. Please note that when we're graphing, we are doing an x versus y, where x is our independent variable and y is our dependent variable. We are looking at age versus height or weight, so age would be the independent variable, height or weight would be the dependent variable, as height and weight depend on how old someone is generally, at least as a child. And then for part 2, we are looking at graphing E. coli concentration versus optical density. Again, we're thinking about which one is dependent on which. So optical density essentially looks at how transparent our solution is of E. coli. And E. coli concentration is the amount of E. coli we have. So I'm not going to tell you which one is the independent or the dependent variable, but you should know from the fact that one of them is concentration, one of them is how visually transparent something is. So from that kind of description, you should figure out which one is which, but if you do have a question, please let me know. We're going to go over in this lab how to do a good graph, and I'm going to do that by showing you how to graph the first part, and then you'll graph part 2 by yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new sheet. I find that a little bit easier. I will do a sheet for each of my different graphs. You do not have to do this, but I find it easiest. So sheet 1, I'm going to have age, and I'm just going to copy this first set of data. So you click on the A at the top, and then you do Control C or Command C if you're on a Mac. And then you can click on the first cell. That's what each of these little blocks are. And you could do Control V or Command V. And that gives you that row of data, column of data, rather. And then I think I'm going to do boy's height. So again, I'm going to do Control C or Command C. And then Control or Command V to paste. Now I have my X and my Y data. I'm going to click on the first age, which is 2, and I'm going to hold down my clicker button, and I'm going to drag. And that should drag these first 2 columns, and they should be highlighted from A4, the cell A4, down to the cell B39. I will then press Insert, and I will click on this chart option up here to say scatter plot. And I want the scatter plot that is not connect the dots. So just the scatter plot where we just have our dots like so. And this is the start of my graph. So now I have my data points. After this, everything we're doing after this point is looking at trying to graph this data in a good way. So what we're looking for in a good graph. Good graphs include titles. It's going to include title axes, axes titles, a chart title that is descriptive, telling us what is in our graph itself. It's going to include a trend line, an equation for that trend line, and an R-squared value for that trend line. So if you are on a PC, you can add most of those elements onto your graph using this plus button right here and click on chart elements. If you are on a Mac, you need to add the chart elements over here. So we're going to be adding axes titles. So you can go to the primary and the horizontal. If you are on a Mac or on a PC, you can just click on axes titles and that'll put the axes titles in there. Additionally, we want to zoom in on our data. Our data points should take up at least 80% of our graph area. So if you were to put a box around our data points, that box should be at least 80% of our graph area, if not more. So I'm going to start my graph at about 80. My y-axis starting at 80. And then my x-axis, I'm probably going to start at about 2, probably, or 1. So I'm going to click on the axis that I want to change the values for. Then I'm going to right-click or double-click and select Format Axis. Once I get to there, I'm going to have a minimum and maximum value. My minimum value is going to be about 80. And then I press enter, and that should drag all of these points down like so. And then if I really want to, I can make my maximum 180, and then I can really zoom in on that data. As far as my x-axis, to change those values, I'll click on the data or the actual numbers down here on the axis, and then right-click or double-click to click Format Axis, and we'll get a minimum and a maximum again. I'll probably leave my minimum at 0, but I'm going to set my maximum as 20. I'm really fine. Put my minimum at 1. There we go. And that zooms in my data. So now my data points are taking up the majority of my graph. After that, I want to add a trend line. So again, if we are on a PC, we're going to click this Chart Elements button. If we are on a Mac, we're going to go into Chart Design and click on this Add Chart Elements. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to hit Trend Line, and that will give me a trend line right there. I then will click on that trend line. I'll see a little dot here and a dot here that tells me that I have selected that trend line. Then I'm going to right-click after I have selected it. Right-click or double-click, and then go to Format Trend Line. And over here, I should have the option to display equation on chart and display R² value on chart. And that is my equation for my line, my trend line. And then the R² tells us how close our data fits to our trend line. So we have a 0.9769. That's a decent correlation with the data, but because of the stuff up here and down here, it's not a perfect correlation with the data. So right now, our data, our trend line, our equation, those are all things that look really good. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to manipulate our titles so that they tell us what's going on in this graph. So if we look back in our lab, so going into the graphing procedure, we can see that what we are graphing is average height weight data for children in the United States from 2000. So me in particular, I did average height data for boys in the United States from 2000. So I'll go ahead. I don't think I can actually copy this. No, I can't copy this. So I will just type in that into my chart title. My chart title is going to be average height data for boys in the US the year 2000. And then I have a descriptive title, which tells me exactly what the data I'm looking at is in this graph. And then my axes titles, every axes title should have a title saying what it is, along with the unit describing those data points. So on my x-axis was my age, And we can do age or boy's age. And in parentheses, I'm going to put years because that is my unit. These are in years. And then my y-axis, that is boy's height. And then if we look, we can see that that's in centimeters. So we'd put cm or centimeter, whichever one. There. Oh my goodness, what did I just do? And now I have an appropriate graph. It has a descriptive title. It has axes titles with the units. It has a trend line with a trend line and equation and an r-squared value. And the data points are taking up at least 80% of the graph. So those are the things we're going to be looking for in a graph every single time we do a graph this semester. So when you do your graph for your next set of data, specifically for the E. coli concentration versus optical density, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to go through, you're going to graph the data, you're going to make sure that you have a trend line equation, r-squared value. You have axes titles that are descriptive with units. You're going to have a title of your graph. So with that one, looking back down, it's going to be this stuff over here. So we're looking at essentially the turbidity that's going on with this graph. So it is the E. coli concentration versus optical density. So you could talk about your E. coli cell or E. coli colonies with their turbidity, so that you're not talking about it being optical density. And this 550 nanometers, they determined the optical density at that wavelength. So this is not a unit. This is the wavelength that they use to determine the optical density. There's actually not an optical density unit that we're using here. It is almost like it's almost like a fractional value, where this is like 100% versus 10%. Is what we're looking at there. And then these are concentrations where this is the actual unit. Cells times by 1 times 10 to the 8th for every milliliter. Okay. After we have completed that, we're going to go into our graphing lab, which I need to publish apparently. I'll fix it for my other class. I'm going to look at this from a student view. Okay, so I'm going to submit those graphs in here. So number 2 is the optical density versus E. coli. And what's the other one at? Oh, sorry. Number 1 is the graph we just did. It is showing you what we're going to be grading these on. And they're all things that I've already gone over. So when you are putting in this graph, you can do a couple of different things. You can go through, you can take the graph itself, you can copy it with Control-C or Command-C, and then you can go into here and just do Command-V, and that will paste it in there. The other thing you can do is you can save this. We can save this as a picture. So this can be our height versus age boys. And then we can go through and we can choose a file here where we go into our pictures. Oh, it's already right here. Height versus age, and we can do it like that. Either one of those are appropriate. Do not put the whole Excel file in there though. Put just a graph in it. But that should be everything. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll see you guys next time.